Welcome to Series 3 of the Going Green podcast. Today we're going to have a look at, yes?
Yeah, no, I just said we're back.
We're back, yes, after bouts of flu and various other things. So we are going to look today at COP27. So I suppose the basic questions that come up for COP27 is it still possible to save 1.5 degrees C? Will perhaps the richer countries help the poorer ones? Can we persuade the economic giants to change their path to destruction? And it hasn't had a good start, has it?
No, the UN president says we're on the highway to climate hell, which was not the most greatest start. It's a good headline, I'll grant him that one.
Yeah. We're on the highway to climate hell with our foot still on the accelerator. And it's interesting to see that since COP26, what's actually happened. And basically, carbon dioxide emissions have actually increased since COP26.
Now, admittedly, there are a couple of reasons for this. And that's one, there's a conflict in Europe that's happening. This is
Russia are devastating Ukraine with all its worldwide repercussions here. You know, it's got the problems with food. It's trying to stop it's trying to make more people starve because they keep wanting to try and pull out of the deal. Look at the ecological damage they're doing to Ukraine.
Especially when, of course, everybody signed up to do not to prevent deforestation, and yet it was something daft. They were reporting how much deforestation has happened in Ukraine. It's one of the interesting things they were talking about. That
shelling the trees to death.
Yes, but it's one of those next things that last at COP26, one of the major announcements or major policies that came out of it was this pledge to reforest the world, and essentially 140 countries signed up to do this. And it was places like Russia and India and loads of countries. Basically everybody who's got forests has signed up. Well, unfortunately this time Russia has announced they are pulling out of the deal because it's not viable for them for some unknown reasons. Because all that Russia had to do was not to do any deforesting. They had plenty of forests in regards to what they were having. So the pledge on their side was actually not to cut the trees down, as opposed to actually planting anything. So we're glancing for that. I
think the only things they're planting are shells, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, other places like the Democratic People's Republic of Congo have come out of it. They've just pulled out of it. And so it's all one of those things where, unfortunately, not that it's bad, but it's just...
Well, it's not helping if you say you're going to sign up for something and less than really a year later you haven't been doing anything, and then you decide you're going to pull out of this. And it's not really one of those most difficult things. And if they can't do the easy thing, which is sort of not chop so many trees down and plant a few, then what hope have they got for everything else? Russia's doing a really good job at the moment. They are managing to fuel a sort of basically a move back to sort of fossil fuels, aren't they? Because they're saying, well, you can't have the gas that we've got. And so other countries are turning back to coal, which is, far worse than... I'm not saying gas is a good idea to have. It'd be nice to get rid of gas, but gas does burn a lot cleaner with a lot less pollutants. So it's better than coal, but better than that would be sort of total renewables. And it's upsetting to see how many countries are saying, well, I think we ought to get that coal stuff going again, rather than perhaps investing in the same money in renewables, which would push things on towards a better future.
Yeah, this is the problem we're finding, is that countries are playing geopolitics as opposed to doing sensible things in relation to trying to keep the world going, in relation to, we need to be, for geopolitics to happen, people need to be living. It was sort of one of the things where a good thing that's come out of it, the UN has made I'd say an early warning system for major problems. This is major storms or making of climate events, in regards to helping countries that don't have good warning systems, such as, I'm not saying Pakistan and its flooding, but it is in relation to some of the African countries who, their meteorology isn't very good. They're doing this worldwide meteorological site to help give countries warning, and lots of countries have signed up to that. And this is to do the early warning of, you've got something coming in, prepare for it and hunker down. And that's hopefully for the next 5 years until the next full COP. So we'll go back to the initial point of last year, COP26. That was the big COP where they write lots of reports and do all those sorts of things. This conference, this COP, is more sort of I'm not a get-together, but they still using the data from last COP on to make the decisions to this year. So
it's an interim thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
How are we getting on? Well, I would say, quite honestly, looking at this, a few countries have done something. Well, actually, I think we'll put it differently. Few countries have done anything. Most have done nothing. And some have done quite a lot of things to make the situation worse.
Yes. So
would you say that's a fair summary of where we are at the moment from COP26?
Yeah, it's not looking good. There are some things that have come out of it, as in they've been the COP has been talking about this year about doing its climate compensation, and sort of lots of places are being pledged to help all the sort of damages caused. They're saying that the global south needs something like 2 trillion of money for repairs to their economies from climate change, and that's been coming through. And they've been they've been moaning about these smaller countries, they've been a victim of history, and the big ones are bigger countries, more economically developed ones. They're the ones causing the problems for the small ones, which is quite true. And it's they were talking about how the rich actually do sort of like cause 5 or 7 times more emissions than the poor do. Just, it's understandable.
It's like you and I. How much in the way of emissions do we put out? And you think, well, I'm just sitting here in sunny England. It's a rare day at the moment. We've had a lot of cloud and rain. So we're actually sitting in sunny England at the moment. And we think, well, yeah, I'm not doing anything here. I'm not really hurting. So most people have got all the electricity on. Well, that's producing sort of a lot of CO2 emissions. So we're using electricity. It's getting into winter here. We're starting to have to put the heating on. We're starting now to basically use more gas, which is adding to the carbon dioxide. We're traveling a lot more. We like a better lifestyle. We like food that's not just necessarily grown in the garden, but we like our food coming from all over the world, and that costs money to sort of bring it in. But the money that's bringing in is actually paying for CO2 emissions. So we are using a lot more than perhaps some other people who are in the third world countries, where they are having to sort of live, well, some of them hand to mouth, and they're just living off the local land. Their transport costs are low. Many of them don't still have electricity. In this world where we're sitting, we think of, great, electricity, something we take for granted. But there are a lot of places in the world where electricity is still, well, not available, really. Some of Africa, some of sort of, well, quite a lot of places, actually.
Yeah. And one of the things that has been called out in relation to all this is that you keep hearing about the major profits from all these big oil companies, and that basically there needs to be a global effort into sort of not curbing the profits, but basically they need to be reinvesting into something cleaner. They need to be going more in the energy transition to the cleaner, instead of what they are doing, which is essentially
Making money.
And that's not being productive. And people are saying this isn't productive, this isn't helping.
How do companies make $200 billion in profits in the last 3 months and not expect to contribute at least 10 cents in every dollar of profit to a loss and damage fund? Barbados Prime Minister.
Yeah, it's one of those things where they've lots been said about this, but you sort of how do you tackle this? This is what they're trying to discuss. This is why they're trying to argue and sort of say sort of is it part of the UN's job? Is it all the smaller countries? But and this is where, in regards to, they're looking at all the climate finance, they're looking at more not the pledges from people, but sort of it's like the UK. We did another I think it's like 20 million or something. It was
but it's a drop in the ocean.
Yes, but why should the government expect to do that when they can get money from these corporations who are making far more money? It's to work out where can we get the money from, how do we get the money, and what we can put it to.
Well, in this country, we won't even do the windfall tax on many of these sort of oil companies who are making, well, frightening amounts of profit every day. Now, they're making more profit every day than some countries are making in a year.
And
frightening.
I know, and this is the whole, why they're moaning about this is because, of course, there is this lack of financing. And so you have these places that are making huge money. Why aren't they not financing it? And that's what that's what we're moaning about. And this is what we're trying to resolve at COP. This is what the international community are talking about looking at.
So they're promising now to sort of start looking at helping other countries, promising to sort of ramp up climate pledges. 24 countries have done this so far. And we're only halfway through COP, so maybe by the time you actually hear this, that more countries will have pledged more money to try and help. But a lot of the things I seem to see at the moment are the rich countries seem to sort of say, it's not our problem, mate. That's your problem. Our problem, we've got enough problems at home. We're trying to sort of do an election or yeah,
and I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm not saying domestic issues need to be focused. It was one of those things where, of course, as the UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, he was said I was not going to focus on COP. I was focusing at home, and then suddenly he goes away. Now, political reasons aside, it was good that he came and did this speech, as opposed to, because of course we were the previous hosts of COP, we're driving home the same message and, going forward, then that makes a bit of sense that way. But it is this not lack of leadership, that's the wrong way to put it, but it is this sort of, we've got plenty of things to do and sort of lots of people talking about it, but nothing seems to happen. yes, people pledge all these things, but we are actually finding that the pledges are a bit hollow. Yeah,
Yeah. Are we doing enough, really?
yeah. It's like China has once again pledged to be carbon neutral in its economy by 2050.
But is that too late?
Yeah. Now, admittedly, they said last year by 2050. So at least they're on goal and saying they're going and getting there. Now,
But they are still using a phenomenal amount of coal. And although they are not making many more coal-fired power stations, the ones that they've got, they're going to be using those for a long time to come. What I do feel is they need to sort of, not just China, all countries need to invest more money in renewables. Why not go for wind power, tidal power? Maybe one of the things that we could actually do to help these countries is not necessarily give them some money, but give them renewable technology. Say to a country, okay, look, what we'll do to try and help you is we could give you so much money. How about if we instead give you 100% sort of your electricity by some sort of renewable means, wind turbines, wave power, tidal power, whatever.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the reason they're not doing that is because, of course, that not the investment isn't there, but it is one of those things where the countries that have the renewable technology and developing all that, we're trying to transition ourselves, and it's the size of the industries not been now. They said the US, according to it, is on the verge of catalyzing their huge climate bill they made to start doing all these things, and they're going to be doing it next year after their election because apparently they still need to pass it, which is a another problem with it. But it's just the fact that sort of countries are going for the quick economic deal of their dash for gas or dash for coal, as opposed to it's going to a bridge to nowhere, because of course there will be time when we are making this transition. As I said, Europe trying to crash in from being carbon neutral or even carbon zero economies, and so suddenly there'll be a problem of not needing fossil fuels anymore. It's like the UAE people have been moaning at the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, about the fact that they keep producing more and more oil, as in their production, their petroleum exports have been increasing year upon year. Now, let's pretend they were sensible about their emissions and their climate goals. If they not halted production, but if they kept production the same, that means, of course, then less oil is going in, which will then say, right, they're producing less, let's actually invest in something better.
But they're making money, and they're trying to make money. This is the big problem. Their money is what makes the world go around, and we're in a money economy. All the countries are trying to do better. We're looking now with problems having had the global pandemic, and then sort of some of the fuel crises. We're now looking at perhaps the whole world going into recession, and they're saying, well, I don't think I can invest in this. We're looking only at the short term of money, rather than we ought to look at the long term is where do you want to live? Do you want to have a nice house, or do you want to have a river here? Or do you want to have the sea here? It's a problem that countries are being very, very short-sighted. They need to sort of do various things, but, well, why should we do it now? Why do now what we could put off later? But they're not seeing that a lot of these things have happened. we've had some of the worst droughts, the biggest floods. When they started COP, they listed, you know, biggest floods ever,
Yeah, well,
or 500 years. Yeah, it's sort of, and it's not still not bringing it home to many of these sort of leaders of the countries.
yeah, well, it was interesting to see one of the things where Google have announced a new little program app. So it's a boring thing, where indication of where floods are happening. Obviously, if a flood was reported, it goes on the map, and basically you can see where there's active flooding at the moment, and through time, and you are seeing that basically not the severity of the floods is increasing. That's the wrong way to describe it, but essentially flooding is increasing, and it's basically happening where flooding, not that it happens often, that's the wrong way to put it, where
Well, you've got to have the right land, haven't you? You've got to have if you've got flat and low-lying land, you're more likely to have flooding. If you live on a hill, it's pretty hard to flood it.
yeah, no, but it was more sort of the intensity of the floods, because they were sort of monitoring. This is part of the UN Meteorology Society. They were talking about how the storms are getting worse. There's, and and what can they say apart from, if the storms are getting worse, that means more rain is being dropped, and therefore, the flooding is going to get worse. And then, of course, we go from extreme flooding to then extreme droughts. We are going from these extremes, and
yeah, we're seeing bigger droughts, we're seeing bigger floods, and of course, not necessarily in the same place. So we are still running out of agricultural land and food. We're running out of, well, power, because everyone wants more and more and more. And what do you do about that? Do you replace with renewables, or do you replace with something else? Some of our nuclear power stations in this country are old. They're being sort of scrapped. What are they replacing them with? Well, more nuclear power. Is that really a good idea? Yes, it is sort of okay for the climate in that it's not producing any sort of carbon dioxide or much carbon dioxide, because there is still quite a lot in the transport systems and other things for this. So it's still a problem. And people are not, I feel, still waking up to this. We were even, Paul and I were commenting that one of our favourite stations, Sky News, has been doing its climate show, and it did it at 6:30. Big highlight time to try and put it in front of people. Now that's been moved to 3:30 in the afternoon. Less people will watch it. They still can say we do a climate show every day, but it's not being put in front of people's faces. Why? Because people aren't interested. Because, well, I got more important things to worry about. I've got to worry about where I'm going to get some money from. We've got basically sort of a financial crisis, that we've got inflation going on, and I'm now worried about, am I going to get enough sort of money to sort of have all my extra TV and all the other luxuries that I want, or am I going to have to cut back on some of them? Some people are talking about sort of running out of food, but in this country, that really doesn't happen an awful lot. There are some people who are on the bread line, yes. There are some people who are struggling with food, but not as much as other people around the world.
yeah, and these are problems that we have yet to solve. And in theory, these are what COP's trying to look at to solve, but they don't have all the answers. It's one of those things where, what answers would you like them to present, and they just can't get to. So it is a struggle, and it is not one of those things, but it is worrying that all these things are coming to fruition. But it's all the fact that we keep getting warnings and getting told how bad everything's going, and yet it's not, no one's doing anything, and it's you might say individually people are doing things, but they're not doing anything, and then you've got the problem of sort of places that can't do anything. They can't do anything because of
Well,
money and those sorts of
let,
things.
let, let's take one of the examples of some countries that can't do anything. Imagine you're sitting in some of the islands in the Pacific, and we're seeing then the sea level rise. The islands are sinking. They're getting smaller. They are getting worse and worse sort of floods and winds, and they're basically just trying to rebuild and recover and perhaps survive, whereas other people are sitting back saying, "Oh yeah, do you know, I haven't got enough money now to go out to the cinema. That's really affecting my life." As opposed to, what is climate change doing? You know, how many people are suffering from wildfires burning their house down? Now, if it's suddenly me, start to worry about it. Whereas, that's in wherever it's going to be, I don't have to worry about that. Oh yeah, there's some nasty flooding. Well, my house is all right. And that's the attitude we've got to start to change. We've got to try and get people to take more responsibility for the world.
They were saying that the not say young, the youth engagement all over the world through the UN's initiatives. This is actually sort of doing quite a lot. But they said currently they're giving the young, they are up through the climate initiatives. They're still too young in relation to, they're not world leaders yet in relation to, we're talking 16-year-olds. They're still getting through, but there is going to be a movement of youth getting into talking about climate. Just think about the US election that's happening right now. What was the third top thing on the agenda? And the answer was climate change. Whether or not it was the more the point was whether it was real or not was a different matter. But they said apparently sort of out of all the voters asked, obviously they said 28% of them said that climate change was one of the biggest issues on their voting block. Reason that and that's what's being seen throughout all the world, is that the climate change is happening. We're seeing it, and we're now asking people, what are you doing about it? What's happening? Are you going to do anything about it? And politicians are slowly saying, oh, we probably should do something about it, and that's working. But at the same time, it's a bit late. They should have been working on it, but they only this is where it gets a bit political in relation to, they only care if the people care. But the people are now slowly starting to care, and so they've taken this on board, and that that's the right way to go forward in relation to these pledges and things. It's like Scotland, they've pledged some money separately to the UK because they can, and that's not wrong, and that's that's where the money comes from is a different matter. But at the same time, it is this saying that a smaller part is taking action, and is leading forwards and going, leading the charge of, although you might not be in control, you could do some things. It's like how much Africa is being invested into their clean energy transition at the moment, because of course currently they're guzzling all the gas and coal, to power their economies. And we're seeing, right, if we can change their guzzling to be cleaner, then they have a head start on everybody else. So it's just where that's happening, and what's turning out to be the state of play of all the worldwide economics and not economics, but more sort of the political view, the view of what needs to happen, how things are happening, and where things need to be happening.
COP26, it was the world's got hope if the world collectively does something. COP27, disaster is looming. If most countries don't do something, we are in, well, real problems. Most countries don't seem to really care unless climate change is directly affecting them. And even then, many of them still want economic growth over everything else. You've been listening to Going Green, looking at COP27. We wanted to be a bit upbeat today. We failed.
Yeah, well, with the announcements of the world has signed a suicide pact, not really upbeat things you can do.
Hopefully, next time, we'll be able to come back and say all the wonderful things that have happened in COP27, and the future is looking really good.
But until that,
it's goodbye from me.
And a goodbye from me.
Goodbye.
Bye.